I am truly delighted to extend a warm welcome to all for joining today's 72nd Indian Constitution Day celebrations webinar on civil services under the Indian Constitution. Shri, first of all, because sir is in conference room, he is basically he is celebrating the Constitution Day, and he will join shortly. So first of all, I will welcome to our chairman of this session, Shri V. Srinivas, Special Secretary, Department of Administrative Reforms and Public Grievances, Government of India, and Director General NCGG. Today, the lead speaker of this webinar, Professor C. Sheila Reddy, Principal Sri Venkateshwara College, University of Delhi, Madam Rumki Basuji, the lead speakers of Good Governance webinar series of NCGG, all leading faculties of Public Administration, Political Science, Sociology, faculty from Indian Institute of Management Institutes, all district collectors from aspirational districts, senior officials of DRPG, my colleagues from NCGG, ladies and gentlemen. As you are aware that 26th November is marked as Constitution Day to celebrate the adoption of the Constitution of India. Every year, as part of the celebration, a number of activities aimed at highlighting the values and principles enshrined in the Constitution are organized. As a part of it, today NCGG is celebrating and organizing a webinar subjected on civil services under the Indian Constitution. So I'm going to introduce our lead speaker. She will speak after joining the Mr. V. Srinivas, sir, Director General, but I would like to highlight her profile and I would like to share with all of you. The Professor C. Sheila Reddy is the principal of Sri Venkateshwara College, University of Delhi. She has worked as an assistant professor in Department of Political Science and Public Administration, Sri Venkateshwara University, Tirupati, Andhra Pradesh during 2006-2011. At the university, she taught public administration, research methodology, and international relations. She joined Indian Institute of Public Administration as associate professor of socio-political development in 2011. Sir had joined. I was reading the CV of Madam Sheila Reddy, sir. May I continue or you will speak?
Please continue. Please.
No, sir. I will continue after your, I think, welcome address.
No, please
So,
continue. Please continue. Professor Poonam, please continue.
Okay, sir. So, her broad area of interest include governance, public policy issues, Ambedkar's thought and philosophy and international relations. At IIPA, she was involved in the design and conduct of many national and international training programs. She coordinated 3 times advanced professional program in public administration, a 10 months flagship program of IIPA for senior officers of Government of India, including all India services, central services, and defense services. She became chair professor Dr. Ambedkar Chair in Social Justice, IIPA, in 2016 and continued till January 2021. She was proactively involved in research and organized value-adding workshops, memorial lectures, and seminars on social justice and philosophy of Baba Sahib Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, focusing on issues such as social exclusion, inclusion, marginalization, etc. She published extensively in national and international journals and has authored 6 books. Her books entitled Food Security and Food Production, Institutional Challenges in Government Domain and Good Governance, The Changing Contours, have been received well in academic circles. Professor Reddy has been actively engaged in evaluation in impact research studies in respect of government schemes and projects which provide feedback and policy advocacy to the departments. She served as the co-editor of the prestigious journal of IIPA, Indian Institute of Public Administration. She is widely traveled internationally a lot. I welcome Madam. So to begin the session of yours, I would like to begin the session of yours, I would like to invite the chairperson of this webinar, Shri V. Srinivas, sir, Special Secretary DRPG and Director General NCGG, to give the introductory remarks. Welcome, sir.
Thank you, Professor Poonamji. Let me invite Professor Sheila for being the first speaker, solo speaker that we've organized in the NCGG webinar series on a very special day, the 72nd Constitution Day celebrations. under a very important subject, civil services under the Indian Constitution. We're all very eager to hear you, and we've just had the Honorable Rashtrapati Ji administering the preamble reading of the Constitution, and we're all very eager to hear you on this extremely important subject, and may I invite you to kindly present your views.
Thank you, sir. Respected Shri Srinivas, Reforms and Public Grievances, and DG National Center for Good Governance, Professor Poonam Singh, Faculty NCGG, Professor Rungi Basu, who is my well-wisher, mentor, and who is a great support to me. It is an honor to be a lead speaker on the occasion of 72nd Constitution Day. As the nation celebrates the 72nd Constitution Day, I extend my warm greetings to all of you. The theme for today's discussion is civil services under the Indian Constitution. Of course, it is a very challenging theme for me, and especially so to speak in front of Shri V. Srinivas, who has rich experience and expertise on the theme, and Professor Rungi Basu, who has contributed a lot on this particular theme. As we all know, when we talk about civil services under the Constitution, we have a part 14 of the Constitution which deals with the services under the Union and the states. And there are specific articles like 8 for regarding recruitment and conditions of service, and 310 concerning tenure of office of persons of serving under union or state, and 311 dismissal, removal, or reduction in rank of persons employed in civil capacities under the union or a state, and 312 about all India services, of course 315 about the public service commissions. I will not go into the specific articles. What I have thought is whatever experience I have on the subject, I should share with all of you. I would try to share the narrative, the transformation, the challenges, the concerns, and what is the present perspective. Since I am the only speaker, I think I can have enough time on that. So I thought I should comprehensively deal with the topic. And of course, I request Shri V. Srinivas and Professor Rungi Basu to add on to my discussion. Firstly, before getting into the subject, I would like to state that administration or governance is a response to a specific socio-political setting, and hence it is constitutional. So when we look at any issue, we need to understand an issue or comprehend an issue in a context, in a given context. Now, since it is also a Constitution Day, I would like to speak a bit about the Indian Constitution. The founding fathers of our Constitution made it very clear that we are not writing a clean state. What does this mean? They took a very conscious decision not to make a complete departure from the past, but to build on the existing structure and experience of institutions which have already been established. To talk about the uniqueness of the Indian Constitution, the Constitution is not the product of a political revolution, but of the research and deliberations of a body of eminent persons of the people, that is Constituent Assembly, who sought to improve on the existing system of administration. So this is very important for us to understand the present theme also. And of course, our Constitution is flexible enough. So the architect of the Indian Constitution and the chairman of the drafting committee, Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, said that Constitution is not a mere lawyer's document. It is a vehicle of life, and its spirit, it's always the spirit of age. Now, with this brief background to come to our present topic, I thought I would address the present topic in brief points, and I have categorized the points under 10 subheadings. Firstly, I would like to talk about a brief background about the civil service in India and administration and an administrator. And in this, I'll be just sharing the views of course, Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel, and giving a passing reference to the words of Jawaharlal Nehru and Paul Appleby also. Then I'll be taking cue from that. I'll be sharing an overview of services we have in India. Of course, it is known to all of you, but to put things in perspective and give a sequence to our discussion, this overview is essential. And I will also be looking at the achievements of Indian bureaucracy and an important aspect, the role of civil service in our parliamentary democracy. What are the general concerns, or what is the perception among the members of society or people part of administration or outside administration about the ailments afflicting Indian civil service? And we will also look at the theme through the paradigm shifts in administration and governance, and briefly at civil service reform, just touching upon some important commissions and committees which I think are necessary, or some points which I feel are essential, and some concerns, some persisting concerns, and what is the recent perspective to address the concern. Now, coming to the first aspect, that is the historical background. We all know that we inherited this system of civil service from the Britishers. So civil service before the crown, like we all know that we were under the colonial rule, civil servants for the East India Company used to be nominated by the directors of company and thereafter trained at Haileybury College in London and then sent to India. Following Lord Macaulay's report of the Select Committee of British Parliament, the concept of a merit-based modern civil service in India was introduced in 1854. So the committee recommended that the patronage-based system of the East India Company should be replaced by a permanent civil service based on a merit-based system through competitive entry examinations. So, after 1855, recruitment to the Indian civil service came to be based totally on merit. Interestingly, the report of the Civil Service Commissioners pointed out that of those who entered the Indian civil service between 1855 and 1878, more than 2/3 were men from university. Initially, the Indian civil service sought its recruits, it is informed that from Oxford and Cambridge. So it was thus an elite service. Subsequently, it opened its doors to Indians, and from 1922 onwards, the Indian civil service examination began to be held in India. Now, the civil service which the British left behind was primarily created for a colonial administration. Of course, towards the last stages of British rule, things slightly changed because they were preparing us for our independence, and attention was paid to the development and progress of the people. But principally, it remained a colonial administration, and some even term it as a sort of benevolent autocracy. In this system, the civil services, particularly the principal service, that is the Indian civil service, were more the rulers of the people of India rather than their servants, So much so that some critiques of Indian civil service, you can call it an exaggeration or take it as it is, describe the service as neither Indian nor civil nor servants of the people. But with the advent of independence, the picture completely changed. A country which was deliberately kept back and exploited over a period of nearly 200 odd years was faced with the gigantic task of making up speedily for the neglect and exploitation, not only for country's development and advancement, but also for the social and economic uplift of its people. Now, to undertake this stupendous task, the then existing civil service, though consisting of tried, experienced, and efficient individuals, had to be geared up to suit the requirements of the changed times, aims, and objectives. A strong view is that, unfortunately, immediately after independence, the nation was gripped with many challenges. The nation faced with many difficult and urgent problems, which prevented as much thought being given to the restructuring of services that was required to equip them for their new tasks. However, the administrative machinery could hold the hands of the new political masters, not only in advising them on the formulation of policies, but also to help them in their implementation with efficiency and expedition. Now, keeping this in view, the framers of our constitution provided for a permanent civil service to perform these functions. Why they choose for a permanent civil service? An added advantage in a permanent civil service was that while due to political changes, the fortunes of political masters changed periodically, it is safe to have a permanent civil service which can provide stability to the administration. Now I'll just talk a bit about the All India Service. Article 312 of the Constitution empowers Parliament to create All India Services on the fulfillment of certain conditions. Then what are the key objectives of government in creating All India Services? Of course, preserving national unity and integrity and uniform standards of administration, maintaining neutrality and objectivity, that is to be non-political, secular and non-sectarian outlook, having a non-sectarian outlook, and due importance to competence, efficiency and professionalism at entry by attracting the best and brightest, and to uphold integrity and the ideals of the Constitution. So with this background, if we have to answer a question, what is expected of administration or an administrator or the entire broadly the civil service, scholars like Ordway Ted regard administration as a moral act and administrator a moral agent. In the words of Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, I quote, these are the words he said while inaugurating Indian Institute of Public Administration in New Delhi on 29th March 1954. He said that, and I quote, administration is meant to achieve something and not to exist in some kind of an ivory tower following certain rules of procedure and Narcissus-like looking on its action. So the test after all is the human being and their welfare. So it is quite foolish to be complacent and self-contented that we are doing the best. So ultimately, the measure of performance is judged by the public, or the test is the what you call welfare of the human being. Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel, who has referred civil service as a steel frame of India, he made observations in the Constituent Assembly to support the continuance of the pre-independence civil service structure. His words flow like this. That is, it needs hardly to be emphasized that an efficient and disciplined and contented civil service, assured of its prospects as a result of, is a sine qua non of sound administration and a democratic regime, even more than under an authoritarian rule. The service must be above party, and we should ensure that political consideration, either in its recruitment or in its discipline and control, are reduced to the minimum, if not eliminated altogether. Indeed, a very, I should say, very practical observation. He also went to the extent of saying that you will not have a united India if you do not have a good all India service which has independence to speak out its mind. Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel, he encapsulated the vision of a civil service for independent India when he was addressing the first batch of Indian Administrative Service officers. He said, your predecessors were brought up in traditions which kept them aloof from the common run of people. It will be your bounden duty to treat the common man as your own. Now I also come to Paul H. Appleby, who is an eminent public administration theorist and who has conducted a survey on Indian administration in the early years of our independence. And he came to India, you all know, on the invitation of Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru. In his work, Public Administration for a Welfare State, which was published in 1961, he very clearly outlined the attributes of a good administrator, which are relevant for our discussion. Who is a good administrator? An administrator should be willing enough to assume responsibility. And he should be able to deal with varied problems and more diverse people. He should have a strong bent towards action and highly reflective with a sense to do things. He should be a good listener and a good initiator of that to which he listens. And he is also one who is effective with the people, quick to see and respond to special opportunities to be helpful. And he possesses the capacity to build his or her own strength by building the competence of his organization. That means he not only works in a team, but he should lead a team effectively. And he should possess the potential and capacity to use his or her institutional resources and avoid using power or authority for their own sake, for selfish motives, and who should be always welcoming reports of troublesome things, lest they reach unmanageable dimensions. And of course, competence is very important. He should be knowledgeable and self-competent, and a good team worker and a hard task master, but a fair one. And finally, he says he should be one who pursues means of empowering administration and one who is hospitable to suggestion. Now I come to my third point. So with this, we look at the overview of services that our nation offers. In a parliamentary system, it is the political executive, of course, which is responsible to legislature, which determines the policies and programs of the government. The implementation and administration of these policies and programs is responsibility of course, a large body of civil servants who, by virtue of their training and professional experience, are well versed in the actual functioning of the government. An important characteristic of the civil service system in India is classification based on the concept of the service. Under this concept, civil service posts are grouped into distinct homogeneous cadres under a common service named on the basis of specific functions attached to the post in question. The various civil services at the union and state levels can be classified in several different ways. Firstly, it's all evident to us, the civil services can be categorized into three broad groups, that is central civil services, all India services, and the state civil services. The central services, of course, function under the union government and are generally engaged in administering subjects which are assigned to the union under the constitution. The all India services are common to the union and the states. There are three all India services, which all of us know, which are all Group A services, namely the Indian Administrative Service, Indian Police Service, and Indian Forest Service. These are common to the union and the states. The Constitution in Article 312 originally mentioned only two services as belonging to the category of all India services, namely the Indian Administrative Service and Indian Police Service. Subsequently, the Indian Forest Service was also constituted as an all India service. The state services function only under the state government. Secondly, the union and the state services can be classified into Group A, B, on their role and responsibilities. Thirdly, these services can also be classified into technical and non-technical services. The central civil services, they administer subjects like, there are many, posts and telegraphs, railways, customs and central excise, income tax, telecommunication, etc. Similarly, there are various state services which perform different functions in the state governments. The state civil services administer those subjects which have been allocated to the states as per the distribution laid down in the Constitution. They implement state laws and also some central laws. Their members are under the exclusive administrative control of respective state governments, and their duties are confined to the territories of state unless when working on deputation. Services and state services can be subdivided into Group A, B, and C according to the rank and responsibility of its officials. This classification is hierarchical, with the Group A services generally carrying higher ranks and responsibilities. Though each of these groups has a different channel for recruitment, there is a provision for promotion from Group C to Group B and from Group B to Group A. The All India services shared between central government and state cadres, small fraction of the total employees. This is the main observation from all the overview of services. Admittedly, the All India services and Group A central services, they provide the leadership to the services both in the central government and in the state governments. So with this overview of the services, let me come to what have been the achievements of Indian civil service, or broadly the bureaucracy. Normally, bureaucracy is not viewed in a positive connotation, like it is apathetic, lethargic. These are the generic, what you call perceptions which we normally hear from different sections of people. But the Indian bureaucracy, since independence, has strived to serve in many respects. We cannot undermine the achievements of the Indian civil service and Indian bureaucracy. The country overcame the trauma and the mayhem of the partition. Many princely states were smoothly integrated. The constitutional instruments and practices have been institutionalized. Elections are held regularly and reasonably well. except for the brief period during the internal emergency of mid-70s, we have had regular elections. Despite pointing out fingers or pointing out deficiencies in Indian political process, India has held regular and credible elections successfully. The management of elections is certainly a bureaucratic success in India. Election Commission in India is a strong and independent constitutional body vested with adequate authority and resources with a clear and overarching objective during elections. This is a testimony to the fact that bureaucracy or civil service can deliver if the objectives are clear, resources and authority are adequate, and accountability is swift and effective. The approach paper of the Second Administrative Reforms Commission concedes that we have an impressive administrative structure and it responds well when objectives are clearly defined, resources are made available, and accountability is surely enforced. Besides this, other achievements include the nation remains united and democracy endures. India is a vibrant democracy. Of course, that is a different matter that if you self-introspect ourselves, how mature is our Indian democracy, we need to have a separate debate on that. But democracy thrives and survives in the Indian context. To continue further, moderate progress has been made in achieving national goals. Bureaucracy as a steel frame exists as the basic skeleton of the state. It continues to be the executive arm of the state. The functioning anarchy, John Kenneth Galbraith, the former US ambassador to India and a renowned economist, he called India a functioning anarchy. So the functioning anarchy has not descended into a dysfunctional anarchy. So there is some stability. So the credit goes to the civil service. India as a multi-ethnic, multilingual, diverse, federal and free nation state continues to thrive. So civil servants are expected to uphold the values of the Constitution, but they have to work in the hierarchy. It cannot be denied that the masters in a democracy are the elected government of the day. So it is against this backdrop, I would like to look at my fifth point, the role of civil service in our parliamentary democracy. As I already outlined, a permanent civil service is the sine qua non of a parliamentary democracy. Now, in the midst of change of periodic elections, the civil service provides an element of stability and continuity without which orderly government would be impossible. Our constitution vests the executive power of the union and the state in the president and the governor respectively, and enjoins that this executive power shall be exercised by them directly or through officers subordinate to them in accordance with the Constitution. These officers belong to our permanent civil service. In effect, it is the Council of Ministers with the Prime Minister or the Chief Minister at their head who exercise the effective power of the state through officers of the civil service. Now, the relation between the ministers and civil service in a parliamentary democracy such as ours is not amenable to any precise definition. However, some of the broad parameters of the relationship could be formulation of policy of the government is the legitimate task of the minister. At the stage of formulation of policy, the civil servant is expected to give his free and frank advice, but once the minister, after giving due consideration to advice of the civil servant, gives the policy, a final shape, then it is the duty of the civil servant to carry out the policy diligently and faithfully, though he may be having his own views about the soundness of the policy. Secondly, the preservation of integrity, fearlessness, and independence of the civil servant is an essential condition of a sound parliamentary system of government. One of the important functions of the civil service is to speak truth to power. Yes, this also can be matter for self-introspection. Then thirdly, there must be trust and mutual respect between the minister and civil servant, as without them, unity of action in the higher echelons of government will be difficult to achieve. Fourthly, both the civil minister and civil servant must perform their roles in accordance with the constitution and the laws, as even a minor transgression thereof can ultimately be subversive of good governance and rule of law. In our country, the ministers and civil servants are more than mere major players of government. They are the custodians of a nation's ideals, of the belief the nation cherishes, of its permanent hopes, of the faith which makes the nation out of a mere aggregate of individuals. How do we demarcate more clearly the boundary between legitimate intervention and undue interference? Can a mechanism be evolved to insulate civil servants from undue political interference? Of course, there has been a lot of discussion. As observed by Paul Appleby, civil servants should not confuse with political neutrality with program neutrality. I repeat what I just discussed a few minutes back. At this stage of policy formulation, is to render free and frank advice which should not be colored by any political considerations. Once a policy or a program has been approved by the elected government, it is the duty of the civil servant to faithfully and enthusiastically to see its implementation. Not carrying out this task in the right spirit would amount to misconduct, inviting appropriate sanctions. Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel stated on the role of civil servant, sharing his own and the way he used to convey the message to his secretaries. His words, which I quote, "Today, my secretary can write a note opposed to my views. I have given that freedom to all my secretaries. I have told them, if you do not give your honest opinion for fear that it will displease your minister, please then you had better go. I will bring another secretary. I will never be displeased over a frank expression of opinion." So the normal negative perception of bureaucracy, in my perspective, is totally one-sided. A one-sided view on Indian bureaucracy is not justifiable. It is very difficult to differentiate the political intervention from political interference. In a parliamentary democracy, political intervention by political class is desirable because it makes the civil service answerable, accountable. But political interference beyond a limit is certainly objectionable. The general contention is that in reality, it seems as if there is a lot of political interference in the name of political intervention. In this context, one cannot subscribe to a view that a vast majority of Indian bureaucracy is inert, inefficient, and corrupt. Same time, one cannot also confidently assert that Indian bureaucracy is new and honest. Now, what are the what you call discussions, or what are the general things that come out from studies as ailments afflicting Indian civil services? Some of them could be lack of professionalism and poor capacity building, inefficient incentive systems that do not really acknowledge and appreciate upright and outstanding civil servants. That means no real reward for good work. Outmoded rules and procedures that restrict the civil servant from performing effectively. There are some systemic inconsistencies in promotion and empowerment, and there is lack of inadequate transparency and accountability procedures. Also, there is no safety for whistleblowers, and arbitrary and whimsical transfers resulting in insecurity in tenures impedes institutionalizations. In addition, political interference, which we just discussed, and administrative acquiescence or compliance, thereby resulting in gradual erosion in values and ethics, and patrimonialism, that is, power is formally arbitrary and under the direct control of the ruler. So these are the what you call ailments afflicting the Indian civil service, which have been brought out by many studies. Now, let us try to go to the seventh point, that is the paradigm shifts in administration and governance and how it has impacted the civil service. We all know that the 1991 reforms in India can be considered as a turning point in the post-independent India. They have thoroughly revolutionized the way Indians look at trade, business, public policy, and governance. Since then, both the government and the public have been continuously absorbing, accommodating, updating the global trends in various fields and sectors into the Indian setting. Public administration is no exception as far as the changes and reforms in this era are considered. Some key reform measures have deeply influenced India. The demolition of license Raj, privatization of key sectors, opening up to the global economy, mushrooming of private and global media, e-governance, etc., have transformed the way the traditional civil service has been functioning. These reforms have forced the traditional mindset of the Indian bureaucracy to shed its hierarchical, rigid, rulebook guided public administration to a more responsive public administration, as the continuous global influences obligated to adjust to the new demands of the post-reform India. Winston Ostrom, the chief proponent and advocate of public choice theory, observes that when the central problem in public administration is viewed as the provision of public goods and services, alternative forms may be available for the performance of those functions apart from an extension and perfection of bureaucratic structures. So, bureaucratic structures are not necessary. Bureaucratic structures are necessary, but they alone are not initiators for a productive and responsive public service economy. So, what I mean to say is the concept, nomenclature, and the very idea of public administration transformed through stages of new public management to governance. New public management, considered being a paradigm shift in public administration, is a combination of various methods and techniques to modernize public sector management. The principal issue is not what the government should do, but how it should do. It needs to reinvent to be adaptable, responsive, efficient, and effective. As we know, governance constitutes mechanisms, processes, and institutions through which citizens and groups articulate their interests, exercise their legal rights, meet their obligations, and mediate their differences. In the evolution of public administration from its conventional notion to the new public management and eventually to governance, the role of civil service, or broadly bureaucracy, has been crucial in the West. Bureaucracy in the West has taken up the task of reinventing itself to serve the people better as an ethical and moral obligation. But in India, the journey to new public management and taken place more of an influence of globalization, increasing awareness among the public of their rights, the role of pressure groups like the media and NGOs, etc. As a result, the political parties, governments, both at the center and the states, and the bureaucracy itself collectively incorporated the positive changes and improvements in the administrative system slowly. Added to this, the initiation of e-governance, both at the central and state government levels, has put extreme pressure on bureaucracy for transparency and accountability and speedy delivery of services. In addition, in the last 20 years, the non-governmental organizations and media have grown into peer pressure groups and the performance auditors of the Indian civil service or bureaucracy. So rapid and fundamental changes in the political, economic, and technological fields call for major changes in the civil service. Countries are competing not only in the marketplace, but also on the quality of governance structures. The change in policy of deregulation, liberalization, and competition has suggested a new role for the civil service. What do they emphasize? They emphasize the strategic management of the economy in less prescriptive and more market-driven approaches. The changes in the economic structure raise new demands related to control and accountability of the civil service, as well as new definitions of professional obligations. In addition, the role and importance of civil society organization and of the private sector in the Indian economy and the society in general have increased substantially over the years. As a result, it is important for civil society, the private sector and civil society organizations as partners in the process of economic and social development of the country. Of course, this has been happening. Now, with this understanding of shifts, if I have to talk a bit about my 8th point, that is the civil service reform, the various commissions and committees, we know that civil service as the primary arm of the government or executive arm of the government must keep pace with the changing times in order to meet the aspirations of the people. The purpose of reform is to reorient the civil services into a dynamic, efficient, and accountable apparatus for public service delivery built on ethos and values of integrity, impartiality, neutrality, and now the focus is on delivery. The reform is to raise the quality of public services delivered to the citizens and enhance the capacity to carry out core government functions, thereby leading to sustainable development. Of course, there are many committees which have given plethora of recommendations, some which appeal to me a lot. For example, in 1949, the Gopalaswamy Iyengar committee suggested that a department should be identified with a secretary's charge and a ministry should be identified with a minister's charge. And A.D. Gorwala, in his 2 reports to the Planning Commission in 1951, recommended that there should be a greater understanding between ministers and civil servants. Of course, some of the recommendations have been implemented. Santanam Committee in 1964 recommended the Constitution Central Vigilance Commission and Administrative Vigilance Divisions in all departments. And the first Administrative Reforms Commission emphasized the importance of proper personnel planning and cadre management. The 5th Central Pay Commission in 1997 advocated the constitution of a high-powered civil services board, both at the center and the states. I think V. Srinivas could comment on a lot on this civil services boards. Then Surendranath Committee report in 2003 made a recommendation to review the system of performance appraisal, promotion, empanelment and placement for the All India services and other Group A services. Then the Committee on Civil Service Reforms, that is Kota Committee, recommended domain assignment for civil servants. It also raised concerns that upright civil servants are getting marginalized in the process of governance. It also recommended to remove corrupt officials from service and give them an opportunity to defend themselves in a post-decisional hearing only after their removal from service. And after 15 years of service, there is a need for rigorous review to assess the performance of higher civil servants to weed out the corrupt and inefficient. I think some things are moving and things have been initiated. Then it also stated that Indian administrative service should not monopolize all key posts in Government of India, and there is a need for single directive to protect honest officers who take bold decisions in the public interest. I would also refer briefly to what was the second Administrative Reforms Commission's approach to key principles of civil service reform. Firstly, to put it very, very briefly, setting right the asymmetry of power. It was noted that there is an imbalance in the exercise of power in governance. Often systemic rigidities, needless complexities, and over-centralization make public servants ineffective and helpless in achieving positive outcomes. Second, which we have discussed and very important, insulating civil servants from undue political interference. We all know that there was a public interest litigation filed by 83 retired bureaucrats, including TSR Subramaniam, to insulate public bureaucracy from political interference. Supreme Court in 2013 directed the center and states to set up a civil services board to decide on transfers of officials of all India services, that is Indian Administrative Service, Indian Police Service, and Indian Foreign Service. It also recommended a fixed tenure of bureaucrats so that it will promote professionalism, efficiency, and good governance, because much of the deterioration in the functioning of bureaucracy is due to political interference. Thirdly, professionalization with stability of tenure and competition. Continuing with our discussion, many challenges or meeting the challenges require domain expertise and long experience in the sectors concerned. There is also need to foster excellence in the public system. Existing procedures and practices do not adequately help in developing domain expertise, nor do they help in utilizing the available domain expertise. The next thing which the second ARC emphasized is citizen-centric administration. That is the participative democracy by making the governance apparatus an instrument of service to the people. Of course, the focus largely in the contemporary governance is on citizen-friendly, citizen-caring, and citizen-centric administration. Talking about accountability, it states that there are alibis of non-performance On the other, competence and integrity are not adequately recognized or rewarded. And it also emphasized on outcome orientation and not the thrust on processes. So even the public policies should not be target oriented, but they should be outcome oriented in order to make a real difference. And it also finally talked about promoting public service values and ethics. Apart from the traditional civil service values of efficiency, integrity, accountability, and patriotism, it is necessary for civil servants to inculcate and adopt ethical and moral values, including probity in public life, respect for human rights, and compassion for the downtrodden, and commitment to their welfare. So with this, if we have to analyze, there was a workshop held on civil services reform on 26 March 2007 in Indian Institute of Public Administration. And during his speech, the chairman of second ARC, referring to those times and trying to analyze the civil service reform, he stated, I think are quite apt. We always put the cart before the horse. We increase the number of cars, but you do not develop the roads. We should have first developed the roads. This is where we are going wrong. Unless there is a capacity building in our administrative structure, we will upset the apple cart. So some persistent concerns remain. So if I have to raise some questions, what have been the persistent concerns? Is a career-based bureaucracy with public servants ascending up the ladder with time the best solution for achieving outcomes? Or is a position-based bureaucracy with each office open to choice and competition with a guaranteed tenure a better option? How can such competition and choice be fostered and institutionalized? Of course, there are pros and cons also to this, the lateral entry initiative. We need to make it more systemic and institutionalized. Then, how do we effectively decentralize administration both horizontally and vertically? How can we ensure congruence between authority and responsibility at all levels? A vast majority of civil servants function at the cutting edge level. How can the performance of these government servants be improved? Can the same principles of civil service reforms applicable to senior positions apply to this level also? I'm trying to raise many questions. What are the incentives we can provide in the system to promote better performance? How can we make the civil servants more service-oriented and citizen-centric? What mechanisms are required to make public servants accountable to the public? And what is the institutional mechanism to promote informed public discourse and peaceful citizens' assertion for better delivery of services? To answer or address some of these questions, I think the government's mantra, which our Honorable Prime Minister often keeps on highlighting at many places, that reform, perform, and transform. With changing times, a need may arise that we have to change our working style. Of course, from regulator, we need to be an enabling entity, and with quantum jump in work must also come a qualitative change. Push for reforms comes from political leadership. Political leadership can push for reform, but the perform angle is determined by officers. What is essential is a a spirit of ownership. The civil service should become a catalytic agent. Now, what is the problem? The problem is adaptation in governance. The challenge is how best we can adapt. We need to build governance into reform fabric, and strong cadre of technocrats, economists, professionals will have to get into the administrative process that is happening, and also fitting traditional vertical system to the new challenges and devolution and integrating new horizontal system to the traditional vertical ones. So civil servants need to engage with people and look at new ways of achieving objectives in the interest of people to become agents of change. So I'll just take 5 or 7 minutes more to come to my last point. The role of public servants is to help citizens articulate and meet their shared interests rather than to control or steer society. The role of public officials in present day is to facilitate opportunities for strengthening citizen engagement and in finding solutions to societal problems. Centrality of the citizens as co-producers of policy and delivery of services fundamentally distinguishes the new public governance approach from both the statist approach associated with old public administration and market-based new public management approach. So the premise of new public service approach is that the focus of public management should be citizens, community, and civil society. To address many of the concerns raised, I would like to share the government's recent perspective on which I think Srinivas can give a better understanding. That is the Mission Karma Yogi. Mission Karma Yogi is the national program for civil services capacity building aimed at radically improving the human resource management practices in the government. The program is meant to bring transformational changes, but by organically linking the transformation of work culture and adopting modern technology to build capacity with the overall aim of ensuring efficient delivery of services to citizens. The mission envisages setting up a wholly owned special purpose vehicle to own and operate the online learning platform and facilitate a world-class learning content marketplace. So at the core of the program is the development of a civil service competency framework, that is FRAC. FRAC is roles, activities, and competencies. What is new and so unique about this? Through FRAC, the work allocation which will shift from a rules to roles paradigm, where only the most suited civil servant will be posted to every position. Every official will understand the attitudes, skills, and knowledge required to excel in their current or future positions and will be guided to build their skill sets as in the career. Now, this IGOT, that is Integrated Government Online Training, is a comprehensive online capacity building platform that enables online, face-to-face, and blended learning on an anytime, anywhere, any device basis. This will enable to create, scale, and democratize the process of building capacity, which has been a really challenge till recently. So an efficient, transparent, and accountable civil service has been the clarion call of our Honorable Prime Minister, Shri Narendra Modi, and was also emphasized in Niti Aayog's report on India at the rate of 75. Karma Yogi, for the first time in the country, the civil service capacity building plans will be approved and monitored by an eminent council led by the Prime Minister himself. Introducing accountability and transparency by design, multiple mechanisms have been devised to ensure real-time and credible evaluation, monitoring, and reporting. The Prime Minister's iGOT Karma Yogi dashboard will enable real-time monitoring of the mission, providing continuous snapshots of each department's progress and scoreboard. So governments will be able to better communicate to officials what their expectations are from holders of each position, the roles and activities that they will be called upon to perform, and the competencies, that is, it is said as BDF, behavioral, domain, and functional, they will need to have to be able to successfully execute against these roles and activities. So managers and their team members will be able to get a better sense of each other's competencies. This is possible on iGOT because of the micro question arrangements that will be in place to drive the 360-degree assessments, as well as the authorized independent assessment centers it will offer. So government officials who will take up responsibility for their career development because of the newfound clarity around competencies required for each position and access to the most impactful competency building product through this iGOT platform, irrespective of whether they have the approval of their manager and whether their ministries, departments, and organizations have onboarded onto the platform. So before I conclude, the full potential of civil services can be realized when means, motive, and opportunity can come together. MMO means is enabling use of modern technology to, I'm concluding, to promote transparency and build civil service capacity. Motive is transforming the work culture in government, and opportunity is strengthening the government institutions and processes. So finally, to conclude, an effective and compassionate functioning of government civil service is crucial to the bold and imaginative steps which are imperative to improve social and economic conditions, reduce poverty, stabilize population, enhance economic prosperity, and make service delivery system citizen-friendly and efficient. It has now been proved country after country that an honest, professionally sound, contented civil service, or broadly bureaucracy, is a critical element of any program. It is thus of utmost importance that the best brains in the country are attracted to the public services. They should not only be motivated to enter the service, but to also serve in a professional and dedicated manner. This necessitates a careful handling of all the major parameters pertaining to civil service. So I tried to put some things in perspective with, I think it was very challenging, and I don't know how much justice I have done to the theme of the today's session. So once again, I'm very grateful and thankful to Shri V. Srinivas for reposing so much faith in me and making me the lone speaker for today's session. Thank you, sir. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Professor Sheila. We greatly admire the breadth of the coverage of the subject and also the depth into which you went in, starting from when the first civil services examination dating back to Macaulay to all the way to Mission Karma Yogi, and also looked at a broad range of issues covering civil service reforms, role of the civil service in a parliamentary democracy, and also posed a number of challenging policy issues that need to be pursued in coming years to ensure that the bureaucracy becomes more and more efficient. Of course, as you have rightly emphasized, the experience across governments in the globe has been to reshape bureaucracies to suit technological and economic requirements. So the Indian civil service also, as a meritocracy, to deliver world-class services, and to be trusted and for honest, impartial, and integrity is an important feature. It must also command the confidence of the people and respect citizens, and should be valued by the ministers. These are points that you have made, and we also take forward the vision of Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel, who in his seminal speech has mentioned how the civil service and impartial civil service can be a sine qua non for good governance. And as you rightly pointed out, what we are witnessing is the next generation administrative reforms, wherein which we witness the rise of a digital state. And that is possible through a more and more intensive capacity building measures, greater accountability systems, as also higher focus on ethical administration. Personally, if you ask me, accountability levels today, after the Right to Information, after the amendments to the Prevention of Corruption Act, the Whistleblowers Act being enacted, have never been higher before in terms of civil servants' capacity to be to the regulatory bodies that have been set up remain very, very high. And we also have set up the National Recruitment Agency, discontinuation of interviews. There's been self-certification for appointment, multi-source feedback introduced in for senior appointments, and also an intensive review for premature retirements. So these are being witnessed. Also, citizens' engagement with government has gone up with the centralized public grievance portals, and the empowerment of citizens with e-services, which are the next-gen services, is being widely seen. So the National E-Governance Plan has brought in tremendous amount of transparency and ease of transactions into the citizen-state relationship. As you have rightly pointed out, there are challenges as we go forward in terms of how the civil service would like to reform itself, and lateral entry in terms of recognizing merit, and also authority and responsibility at all levels, and informed public discourse. The civil service being engaged in informed public discourse should also be taken into consideration. Of course, we do implement the Prime Minister's Awards for Excellence in Public Administration, which reward some of the best practices across the nation. There is also a continuous review in terms of authority, responsibility, and in terms of the channels of submission. How do you increase efficiency in decision making? And lateral entry in civil services through the Union Public Service Commission has now become a reality. With the right to information, the citizens' involvement in the public discourse and policy making has definitely enhanced. The Mission Karmayogi has been a path breaker in terms of setting up standards, and we hope a huge number of civil servants, as you rightly pointed out, the All India services and the central services form a very small proportion of the total civil service of the nation. So the Mission Karmayogi looks at a much broader perspective of taking on board all the civil servants across the length and breadth of the country, and empowering them through digital programs, their capacity building and transformation from rule-based civil servants to role-based civil servants can yield very far-reaching dividends. So let me conclude this Constitution Day session by thanking you, and also quoting the Honorable Prime Minister from his Independence Day address, wherein he said, "In this decade of Amrit Kal, we will give priority to next generation reforms. We will ensure that all the facilities like service delivery should reach citizens up to the last mile. It should reach the last person seamlessly, without hesitation or any kind of difficulty. For the overall development of the country, unnecessary interference by the government and the government processes in the lives of people has to be ended." So I think on this Constitution Day, we would rededicate ourselves to these objectives that have been outlined, and also to the core values that the Constitution lays down for the civil servants. So let me thank you personally for accepting our invitation and for delivering what is truly a seminal lecture, which truly depicts and marks this occasion of the 72nd Constitution Day. I'll now invite Professor Poonam Singh ji to kindly give the vote of thanks.
Maybe we can give 2 minutes to Professor Rumki Basu with your permission. Maybe she has some comments.
Yes, Professor Rumki, would you like to come in for a very brief intervention?
Yes, I think your time is up, so I'll be very, very brief. But let me congratulate Dr. Sheila Reddy for an excellent, very thoughtful and incisive presentation, a very balanced presentation on the role of the civil services in the past 75 years. I agree with most of her arguments and her views on the role or the changing role or the paradigm shifts in the role of the civil services, which is something to be emphasized on definitely in any discussion on the Indian civil services. I think the adaptability and the resilience of the civil services need to be emphasized because they've had many paradigm shifts, due to changes in the economy and the political ideology of the political regimes. So this is one important point. But I think the major point I would like to make here is that we perhaps if she had more time, she could have stressed a little on this, the uniqueness of the constitutional provisions pertaining to civil services, because this is not there, as far as I know, in any constitution of the world. So this is a one of a kind unique protection given to the civil servants, unparalleled in the history of constitutionalism. So this is a point worth mentioning. And I think the other major point which I've stated several times is that the history of Indian democracy runs almost parallel with the institutionalization of the civil service role in this country. So it's Indian democracy. We have a lot to speak about Indian democracy in the 75th year of independence. The reason why, we are the world's largest democracy, but if there has been a significant institutionalization of the role of the civil services in this country, that politico-administrative relationship, which has evolved over 75 years, has certainly gone to making Indian democracy also one of its kind in the world. So these are two major points. And the current, as I see it, the post-COVID era has, the ongoing COVID era has taught us a couple of lessons regarding the centrality of the state and the centrality of the role of the civil services. So in future, I think capacity building for public service delivery is the key mission, which I think Mission Karma Yogi talks about and the Prime Minister is repeatedly talking about. And these should be the central focus of intervention for the Indian state and other experiments in Indian democracy, which we may be doing. So I thank Dr. Sheila Reddy and of course Shri V. Srinivas for also his incisive comments on the kind of evolving role that he has seen as an insider happening in the Indian bureaucracy. Thank you so much for giving me an opportunity to speak.
Thank you very much, Professor Rumki. May I now invite Professor Poonam to kindly give the vote of thanks.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much. It's a great privilege for me to proposing vote of thanks for this auspicious event, which were organized by NCGG and has been directed and suggested by our Director General. One thing I would like to say only that the reports of the commissions, the thoughts of the committees, and several times we have listened from our Director General who talks on the history of civil servants, civil service of the India, and the public policy and governance. He always talked on. So one thing I would like to request, I think the audience, especially the sir and both of you are sitting here, that we should think on the there is need to rework on the promotion policy for the civil servants. Why it is, I think the time bound, I think they are emphasizing the time bound. It is the 15 years, the non-performing civil servant is waiting and the performing civil servants are waiting, and both are promoted. And both are promoted. When they get the promotion, the non-performing, they are enjoying, and the performing persons is frustrated. So there is rethink on the, I think, the promotion policy, and I would like to thank our Director General Shri V. Srinivasa, Special Secretary DRPG, our lead speaker, Madam Sheila Reddy, Madam Rudki Basuji. I think we would like to appreciate our great audience from the civil service, the academicians, my colleague from NCGG, and all the team, and ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much and have a nice day. Thank you, sir.
Thank you all. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Professor Sheila. Thank you very much.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor.
Thank you.